Everyone, and welcome to tonight's Disability Tech Talk featuring Souvik Paul, founder and CEO of Aurie. I'm Jocelyn Cohen, Vice President of Communications and Engagement with Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation, or CPARF for short. This event is closed caption enabled, and I've turned on transcription. It's also being recorded, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel soon. For additional accessibility, I'll share a visual description of myself. I'm a white woman with dark brown shoulder-length hair that's down and brown eyes. I'm wearing large tortoise shell glasses and a mint green shirt and a light gray cardigan. There's a CPARF related background behind me that has white and different hues of green. And sometimes I might look like my eyes are looking away from the screen or rolling, but that's part of my cerebral palsy. Just want to add a note that it's a great time for you to join us as our flagship fundraiser. September starts this Friday, September 1st, a 30-day fully virtual inclusive fundraising event. September encourages everyone to get moving in the ways that work for you while raising funds for CPARF. And in case this is your first online event with us, I'd like to tell you a bit about what CPARF does. Despite being the world's most common lifelong physical disability and affecting 18 million people worldwide, cerebral palsy is one of the most underfunded conditions. That's why CPARF funds research and innovative technology that will change what it's like to live with cerebral palsy. We run Remarkable US, the US-based disability tech startup accelerator that's part of the global Remarkable Accelerator program. And through seed funding, mentorships, deep dives, and support during this initiative, we help startups bring affordable, life-changing technology one step closer to the people with disabilities who need it. Because this world isn't built for disabled people, but thankfully, there are companies that place disability at the forefront, and Remarkable US is working with them. They're built to fill in gaps, meet crucial needs, and make accessibility accessible. Aurie, a member of our 2023 cohort, is one such company. It was started by Souvik Paul to make products that people with disabilities can use to maximize independence and overall health. Its current focus is a reusable, no-touch intermittent catheter for the 4.5 million people with cerebral palsy who experience bladder issues and the millions more with paralysis and other disabilities that require them to catheterize. This is a huge deal. Souvik earned his BA from Harvard University and his MFA from the School of Visual Arts, and I'm excited to chat with him tonight. As I mentioned earlier, you can leave questions for him in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. Welcome, Souvik.
Thanks for having me.
Really glad to have you. So to start things off, can you tell us more about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. So I'll start with my physical description for accessibility. So I'm an Indian American man with short brown hair, the beginnings of a beard since it's been too long since I shaved. It's not an intentional style choice. And silver framed glasses. I'm wearing over the ear headphones and a dusty pink shirt. My background's blurred, but it's of my apartment in Oakland, California. So my professional background is in finance and industrial design. So way back when, after undergrad, I worked at JP Morgan as a trader on Wall Street for 3 years, then went to graduate school for industrial design. And then prior to starting Aurie, I was a design strategist at Johnson & Johnson, where I focused on partnering with their vision care brand AccuView to design products and services that would help consumers use products like contact lenses.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I do know what AccuView is. So that's a really interesting way to start things and to land where you are. So what motivated you to start Aurie?
Yeah, so like I said, I was originally working in finance, and that was kind of like my default job out of college. And I think as I was working, I kind of realized I was spending most of my waking life at work, and I wanted to spend that time making more of a positive impact. And my decision to go to design school was motivated by looking at products like the iPhone that had been out for 5 years at that point. So a lot of people were writing retrospectives about it and how much it changed like the nature of computing for not just people in the US, but people in rural villages and things like that in other countries where typically like internet access and computers are hard to come by. And so for me, it was kind of like design played this really incredible role in creating positive change in the world. And so that was really what motivated me to go to grad school in the first place. It's, the design of physical products that could help create positive impact. So 2 weeks before grad school started, my future sister-in-law was in a car accident, and she sustained a T2, T3 spinal cord injury. And so for those 2 weeks, I was basically in the ICU visiting her. My now wife was also in the hospital because she was in the car as well. And so I was staying with Serena and Karina, and basically just it was like out of a medical drama. It was like all of the bad news and the really terrible conversations that you hope to never personally experience. And, throughout this entire time, the question was, do I continue to go to grad school, or do I put things on pause and try to help out where I could? And ultimately, in talking with my wife, it was I made the decision to go to grad school, but that felt like a very selfish decision. And so the way that I was able to reconcile that for myself was, if I really believe that design could create positive impact in the world, then I needed to put that belief to the test and really see, okay, can it be used to improve Karina's situation, my sister-in-law's situation? Could it be used to create products that would help people living with spinal cord injury and other disabilities? And that was really like the start of the motivation for creating Aurie and creating the Aurie system.
I really appreciate you sharing that personal story. I can't imagine how stressful and emotional that was, and I appreciate that you were able to take a pragmatic approach to something that's emotional. And like, there's so much that you can't fix or help when someone gets hurt like that, and you're like, no, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do this, and the world needs more people like that. So thank you for doing that. Can you explain what intermittent catheterization is, and also how that differs from other types of catheterization for folks that are watching who might not know?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was one of the first things that I learned as Karina was rehabilitating and adapting to life with a spinal cord injury. So most people are familiar with indwelling catheters. These are catheters that stay in the body that pretty much always drain out to a leg bag or some kind of capture device to capture urine. The problem with indwelling catheters is that they lead to a lot of infections. Like, it's very common. It's the second most common cause of hospital-acquired infections are indwelling catheters.
Wow.
And then the second issue with indwelling catheters is, if you can imagine someone who isn't in the hospital, who is living their daily life, having a urine drainage bag can be really cumbersome. It can be sensitive from a personal perspective. And so for people living with spinal cord injuries, multiple sclerosis, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, a lot of folks are instructed to use intermittent catheters instead. Now, these are products that are basically plastic tubes with holes on either end. And instead of being left in the body, they're inserted when the person is in the bathroom ready to urinate.
Okay.
And so the person inserts them themselves. Sometimes they'll use gloves, sometimes they'll use lubricant, but oftentimes in everyday context, that can be really challenging, just because of everything that you'd have to carry as a result. And so they're inserting the catheter, they're allowing urine to drain from the bladder. As soon as it stops draining, they take it out and typically throw out that catheter. And they go through this process 4 to 6 times at least a day. And so they're, in the course of a given year, an individual will use around 2,400 catheters typically. And even though intermittent catheters reduce infections relative to indwelling catheters, infections are still a really significant issue when it comes to using intermittent catheters.
That makes sense. I would assume because of the environment that you're in also. Like, I'm trying to think of any public bathroom that I would feel like would be any amount of clean, and you want to touch as little as possible So then if you're catheterizing, you're introducing whatever you've touched into your system. Even if you have gloves, you had to touch the gloves, that kind of chain reaction of transferring things.
And even, for folks who are wheelchair users, as an example, unless the sink is literally right next to the toilet, which it sometimes is in accessible stalls, but then, even having an accessible stall is oftentimes a really difficult thing, right? Like, a lot of places in the built environment aren't built with wheelchair users in mind. Like,
Right.
you have to wheel yourself over to the toilet, right? And then you're touching
The
the
wheels.
rims on your wheels, and those are definitely not super sanitary either.
Right. That's like touching the floor,
Yeah.
and everything you've rolled through. So that makes sense. Because no, if someone can help it, they're not going to stay home all day. They're gonna be out and about, and so they have to deal with whatever circumstances they're in. Um, what makes urinary tract infections, which is the kind of infection that people get from catheters, what makes them so much more risky for the people who intermittently catheterize?
So, typically, for someone who doesn't intermittently catheterize, there's still, there's bacteria in the bladder, there's a microbiome in the urinary tract, but typically everything's kind of like cooperating and living together, and you aren't getting a ton of infections. With intermittent catheterization, because you're inserting a foreign body into the urinary tract and the bladder, 4 to 6 times a day, uh, almost as a general rule, people will have foreign bacteria in their bladder. And so doctors, when they're looking at someone who doesn't use intermittent catheters, they're able to use an analysis called a urinalysis to determine whether or not someone has an infection. But in people who intermittently catheterize, they always show up as having a positive urinalysis. Um, and so there's just a baseline level of pathogens living in the bladder, and the body creating kind of some kind of an immune response to those pathogens. But over time, what'll happen is that'll develop into a true infection. It just happens a lot more frequently when someone's using intermittent catheters, again, because they're inserting that foreign body into their body
Right.
so many times. And then once it does happen, because there was that pre-existing flora within the bladder, the actual infection itself tends to be more severe. And when you add in factors like, someone with a spinal cord injury is going to have different sensation under the level of injury, it can take longer to diagnose these, right? You really need time to figure out what's happening, and then in that time, the infection worsens. And then over the course of someone's life, because it is happening with so much regularity, people start to develop antibiotic resistance. And that's
Okay.
where urinary tract infections are still one of the major leading causes of death for people living with spinal cord injury, because the infections worsen over time, and ultimately, like, we run out of antibiotics to treat them.
Right. That that is really helpful. I was unaware. I knew that it was riskier, and I knew that it was easier to get infections with, traditional intermittent catheters, but I didn't understand all the reasoning behind it. So thank you for sharing that with us. And moving on to Aurie itself, what distinguishes Aurie's product from other intermittent catheters?
Sure. So I'll share my screen just because a visual might be helpful here. So
Great.
um, on the screen, you'll see two different types of catheters. So on the left-hand side is a standard catheter. And like I said, it's a plastic tube with holes on either end. That green funnel allows, it directs the flow of urine, but it's pretty simple. And then on the right-hand side, you have what's called a no-touch catheter. And the reason it's called a no-touch catheter is because it has this blue introducer tip, and it has this clear plastic sleeve around the catheter. And what that does is it helps prevent any kind of the contact contamination that we had just been talking about during the insertion of the catheter. The
Okay.
problem is that the catheters on the right side of the screen, they tend to cost 4 times as much as the catheters on the left-hand side of the screen. And so, when insurance is paying for catheters, the basic ones that you're seeing on the left-hand side, they cost around $5,000 a year for insurers. The ones on the right-hand side of the screen cost around $20,000. And so if you look at the actual underlying data of what Medicare does and doesn't pay for, 5% of people who get coverage for catheters from Medicare actually get coverage for the no-touch catheters. It's very difficult to get that coverage because they're so expensive. So what we're doing that's different, and I'll show some images of our prototypes here, is we have our own no-touch catheter. So you can see that it's on the bottom right of the screen. It has a clear plastic sleeve over the shaft of a 16-inch catheter. It also has a tip that helps prevent contamination with the first 3/4 of an inch of the urethra. But we've designed this catheter to be reused with our cleaning and disinfection system. So these are all different pictures of the cleaning and disinfection system that I could go into more detail and describe more about. But the key to our product is we're making our catheter safely and portably reusable, where a device is doing all of the cleaning, disinfection, and lubrication of the catheter. That allows us to sell the catheter at the same $5,000 a year price point as the standard plastic tubes that were on the previous screen, while providing the infection reducing benefits of the more expensive no-touch catheter. So our entire mission at Aurie is taking a technology that has been shown to reduce infection rates by 44.5%, and making it so that more than 5% of the patient population or the user population can actually access it and get insurance coverage for it.
That's fantastic. It's something I haven't had to deal with firsthand, but I do have a friend who uses intermittent catheters, and I know that I'm going to share this with them because I know they've experienced some of what you've already talked about, and they shouldn't have to, nor should anyone have to fight to ensure that they don't get a deadly infection just because one option is cheaper on the kind of insurance that they have. This is fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about I guess the sterilization portion, like the U-shaped device that has the gray lid on it and your name on it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start in the upper right-hand corner. And so I'll try to describe this verbally. So there's a device that comes apart. It has a smaller detachable portion that's kind of like a rectangular prism. And then it has like a larger portion that the smaller portion docks into. And then in the picture, there's also a pod with 3 kind of cylinders coming out of it that's visible. And so basically the catheter gets held in that detachable portion in a U shape to save space. And so when someone catheterizes with our product, instead of throwing out the catheter, they return it to the case. And then they fill the case with fresh water from the tap. So this is around 300 milliliters of water. It's just about a cup of water. In most bathrooms, that would take literally like 10 seconds to fill, if that. And then they bring it back to this base unit and they insert it and press a button, and it starts the cleaning and disinfection process, which lasts around 26 minutes. The cleaning and disinfection process uses an enzymatic cleaner that dissolves any kind of blood or mucus or fat or protein on the catheter so that it can be cleaned. It has hydrogen peroxide that helps to kill any pathogens, any bacteria that are on the catheter from the catheterization process. And then finally, it has lubricant that helps to lubricate the catheter for the next use. This pod, which again you can see in the upper right image, is it gets replaced once a day. So when you're leaving the house, that's usually when you'll replace the pod. Otherwise, you could kind of forget about it. The system will actually tell you how many uses you have remaining in each pod.
That's great.
Um, and the entire device is battery operated. And so some of the other images that we have on the slide in the top left is an image of the entire system when the carrying case is docked into the base. And so you could see it's a pretty compact footprint that could fit into backpacks and things like that for
Mhm.
easy transport. The image underneath that shows a different view where the door where the pod is inserted is open. So you can see how the pod fits into the device. That gets closed before the carrying case gets inserted. And then finally, the last image in the middle, the carrying case is open, and there's a catheter sitting in a U-shaped tray within the carrying case, just to show how the catheter actually sits when the user loads it into the device.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's pretty fascinating to see the contrast between the images you shared before this and what your device and technology are doing, honestly, with some amount of thought that people never gave it before and water from the faucet. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and we recognize we're adding a couple of steps here, right? Usually people when they're catheterizing with intermittent catheters, they're just throwing the catheter out. Although, I will say that a lot of the folks that we've spoken to about intermittent catheterization, they say that they'll oftentimes try to hide the catheter in like wadded up toilet paper or putting it back in its packaging. So there is a step that people take today just because of discretion and wanting to not leave catheters obviously like in the trash of their work bathroom or wherever they happen to be.
Right.
But the way that we came up with this like carrying case design that detaches from the base and all of that is we looked at what people are doing today to catheterize, and we tried to make it so that we were overlaying the additional steps that you have to take to reuse your catheters on that existing practice. So most people are already washing their hands when they're catheterizing, even
Right.
if the sink isn't located right next to the toilet. And so that's why we were like, oh, this would be a good place for them to actually get fresh water from the tap for the cycle, right? It
Right.
was like really keeping in mind what are users doing today and how do we minimize the amount of work.
Thank you for sharing sort of how you landed where you did. And related to that, you've shared on your site and on our podcast that championing disabled perspectives is important to you. I mean, you also shared that today with the inspiration behind the company. So you champion disabled perspectives, of course. Can you tell us more about how Aurie achieves that?
Yeah, well, I think that um, there are things that we do tactically in order to achieve that, but I think beneath all of that is just this recognition that as an able-bodied person who doesn't use intermittent catheters, I am not the subject matter expert here. I have catheterized myself just to know what it's like and to get that hands-on experience, but not like I don't have to pack my bag every day with catheters in
Right.
order to be able to urinate. And so I think that's where we see ourselves being able to provide something that the market hasn't seen before, because we take great lengths to get that user input, that perspective of the person who is chronically self-catheterizing, and we're trying to apply that lived experience in terms of building a product that answers a lot of the struggles that people face today when using intermittent catheters. And so tactically what we've done is we've done over 130 user interviews with people who use intermittent catheters. We've done what are known as formative human factors studies. That's when we put prototypes in front of users and have them interact with it so we can understand where does the experience fall apart,
Mhm.
how difficult is this step to complete, things like that. We've done that with over 50 individuals, all of whom use intermittent catheters. We've surveyed over 300 people living with who have to live with intermittent catheters to urinate.
Mhm.
So we've really tried to make user research less a checkbox or a discrete step, and try to more make it something that we are doing through the entirety of the product development process.
Really fully integrating it into what you're doing and the ultimate product that emerges at the end, which
And
is
I
fantastic.
and I will say, I think there's more that we could be doing. I think in an ideal world, we would have people who use intermittent catheters and who live with other disabilities like as part of the core team. Right now, the person that we're working with on user discovery and user research is someone who identifies as living with a disability, but we have a lot more work to do in terms of like building an inclusive team that is representative of our end users. It hasn't been for lack of trying. It's just, recruiters are thrown for a loop when you're like, well, we would really love to have someone who like lives with a spinal cord injury for this role, because like, typically recruiters can't disclose that information because it'd be used to discriminate against someone with a
Right.
disability. So it's been challenging to try to navigate that and be like, no, we're like asking this question for what we think is like the right reason.
You're countering discrimination and then butting up against the systems designed to prevent discrimination, and sort of a little bit stuck, and you've found end runs around it, but you're not making as much progress on that side as you want. But I
Yeah.
have faith that you will. Just like with everything else with disability, we figure out a way. I have a feeling you will figure out a way to do it. It will just take longer. um I mean, it's just great to hear how committed you are. I mean, I'm not surprised, knowing what I know about you and your company, that you're this committed. But also just noticing like that you've made this difference, but there's just so much further to go, and that you want to get to that further away place, because that's not something that a lot of people are cognizant of. And even if they're cognizant of it, they might get exhausted by the barriers that you're running up against. So I appreciate that you continue to do that. And I'm sure that the disabled people who will be using your products appreciate that too. And ultimately, the people who will be working on your team in the future will appreciate it the most. So we've talked a lot about your product and how it evolved. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced while creating it?
I think anyone who sets out to design and develop a medical device will probably have the same first answer, which is funding. Medical devices require a lot of money, a lot of testing. For good reason, you can't sell them until you get through the FDA. And so there's a lot of upfront capital. So that has been a challenge, especially in the disability space. This is one of the reasons why we were so excited to join the Remarkable cohort, because so often, if you're designing a medical product for people living with disabilities, investors will look at your pitch deck, listen to your pitch, and they'll be like, well, it seems like a niche market. It doesn't seem
Yeah.
like it's big enough. It's too specific. And that is real. That is an actual, like, I can't tell you the number of times that has come up in investor calls. And I think we have been lucky in that Remarkable and some of our existing investors like Lake House Ventures, they haven't said that, and they have recognized like the opportunity here to make a positive impact and to build a sustainable business. But it is a huge challenge, and we've gotten very lucky in that regard. I think the second big challenge was actually designing the wrong product. So, I think it's funny because I am very proud of the amount of user research that we've done and the lengths to which we've gone in order to get user perspectives in the design of the product. But it wasn't always that way, and we had to like kind of mess up first to realize the mistakes that we were making, because the specific design methodology that I was trained in is called user-centered design. You start by talking to people about their product experiences, no design in mind. You're just trying to understand the landscape. And then as you identify opportunities, you build prototypes and you test those with people, and then you get their feedback and you keep refining it. And we had done this for a bit, and then the mistake that I had made as a founder and product developer early on was, okay, we've done that. Now it's time to execute on the vision and to start building this product. And what I wasn't cognizant of was along the way, as we were making design decisions, we were changing the product because of things like what the FDA requires or what is a known technology. And by the time we sat down in front of users again to test the product, people didn't really understand what we were doing, why we were doing, or how it would fit into their lives. Like it just we lost a lot of that user context that was so important.
You designed yourself out of it for a minute.
Exactly. And so this was back in 2020.
Okay.
There's a
particular... Oh, what a time.
Yeah, what a time. It was a remote pilot study that we did with the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute in Vancouver, British Columbia. And it was a really rough focus group. Just, people were just like, I don't know what I would use this for. If you want to be successful in developing a new catheter product, you have to do this, that, and the other thing. And it was a real moment of reflection for us. And then, I think at the end of the day, that was when we really learned that lesson of we are not the experts here. There's no such thing as like a hero designer who will come in and solve all of the problems. Like we need to be as attached at the hip with our core users as possible in order to make a product that will have the impact that we want it to have. And so that's when we really doubled down on, okay, we're going to do the user interviews, we're going to do the formative human factor studies, we're going to make sure that people like and can use the product the whole way through.
I mean, that's what authentic allyship is about, really. Like it wove its way through your company after making that mistake. Like you recognized the errors that you made, and instead of being intimidated by that, you were inspired by that, because there's one of two ways you can go when you land in that spot. So it's great to hear that spurred the really productive conversations. And just going back quickly to what you said about running into the issue where people said this is a niche thing. Thane of Hominid X brought that up when he did his TED Talk with us too. And it's so frustrating to hear that that's what people say. And I wonder if it's at least partially because of societal attitude toward disability. Like no one wants to believe that they will ever be in a situation as a non-disabled person where they'll suddenly become disabled. And I think intrinsically it's because people know how society treats disabled people, even if they don't realize that they know it. And so they're scared of ending up in that position, and they would never want to look at it and see that it affects millions upon millions of people, often people who experience a sudden change in their life just because they were, driving down a road and were in a car accident. Like, no one wants to think about that. And so they just say, no, never mind. This is a niche issue. It's not going to affect me.
Yeah. And I think the other way that manifests is like, when I'm traveling with Karina, the number of people who come up and they're just like, what happened to you? Like,
oh yeah,
just how intrusive that question is, and like the positioning of it is upsetting and shocking, and just, but Karina's just like, oh yeah, like that happens all the time. I'm used to it now.
I got in a fight with a bear.
Yeah,
something
exactly.
I mean, that happens to me too, and it's cumulative. It's happened to me my whole life. What's wrong with you? What happened to you? Why are your legs like that? And I'm sure she gets like, why are you in a wheelchair? All kinds of things. And sometimes you can gracefully extricate yourself from the conversation, and sometimes you just have to deal with it, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, I'm happy that you and Thane and other founders and other folks like you have been able to push past those perceptions and those naysayers who say this is a niche issue, because it really serves the greater disability community. I mean, obviously, based on everything you've said, but just to have these things at their disposal when they didn't exist before. And it is a model of perseverance that I think we have to follow as disabled people. And it's really nice to have allies alongside us that do the same thing, and end up creating these not just life-changing, but life-saving products. And on that note, what were some of your biggest wins when you were creating this system?
Well, I think a lot of them have been coming more recently because we've gotten to a point in product development where we can put like a representative prototype in front of doctors, in front of catheter users, and to see people like kind of consider it, because at first they're just like, I don't know what I'm looking at. This is like totally different. And then when we kind of like say like, well, look at the design of our catheter and here's how you would access this as a user, like I think seeing people be like, I can immediately see what the positive impact would be. I could see that this would be better for me from a urinary tract infection perspective. To see people get excited about it, I think has been really awesome. Just because, I think it just brings us back to like, why are we doing this?
Right.
And having that feedback from potential users is really incredible. Also from doctors, I think doctors tend to like the system for similar reasons, but slightly different ones than users. I think a lot of doctors that we've talked to have like really been like excited about reducing environmental waste. They have also been really excited about like, oh yeah, I know that insurance is an issue for my patients, and this seems like it would really fit a big need in the market. And I think just getting that feedback from people who are seeing people who intermittently catheterize every single day, like that is also really powerful. And then I would say the last one is, or the last two. So one is the FDA has also kind of recognized what we're doing. We've gotten their safer technologies designation because they saw test data that showed that we could clean and disinfect our catheters. They know how we're trying to commercialize the device. And so they've given us this official designation that allows us to have more constant contact with the FDA, and like really understand what our requirements are. So that was really awesome. And then I would say
Huge.
yeah, that
Really?
that was a really nice moment where it's just like, okay, like some of the biggest like stakeholders in our ecosystem, they are also seeing the potential impact of what we're working on.
How
And then
recently
I would
was
say,
that?
oh, that was in 2021.
Okay.
So we've had that for some time now, but we've continued to utilize like the different elements of that program to really help accelerate our understanding of like what testing we'll need to do to get through the FDA. And then I would say the last one is just, connecting with investors like Lake House Ventures, with Remarkable, with CPAR and CPA. Like I think it's been really incredible to kind of connect with a group of like-minded individuals who also have very similar priorities in terms of like funding research and technology for people living with disabilities. Like I think it's I hope it's okay to say that, like, it feels like a somewhat nascent ecosystem, but like a
Yeah.
very passionate one. And that has been really cool.
I mean, it is absolutely more than okay to say it, because I feel the same way on the CPAR side of things. I know some of what goes on in Remarkable, but I'm not in the accelerator as it's going on. I was in, one of the Remarkable roundtables, and but just knowing, frankly, that that's happening, there's like a buzz in the background, like, oh, what are they doing now, and like, what's their next step going to be? And I think of you as part of this like graduating class of 2023, and I will always want to know what's going on with Aurie and the 5 other startups from your cohort, because I was so excited when you were chosen and signed on to do it, and I will always be excited about what everyone's achieving. So yeah, it feels like a little family, or like a club, but like a club that's designed to help other people rather than being an exclusive one. And it's a pretty great feeling.
Yeah, it's been pretty awesome.
So kind of moving on a little bit, you talked about how both intermittent catheter users are interested in this, but also doctors and the environment and cutting down on the environmental waste and all of it. I mean, the amount of plastic tubing involved in the medical system, I can't even begin to think about it, catheters and otherwise. But who are your ideal customers? And in addition to that, is there ever a use case for an intermittent catheter in hospital situations, given that the indwelling catheters do cause so much infection? So it's like kind of two different questions, but a little bit related.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think our ideal customers are folks who are using intermittent catheters regularly. These are going to be usually people living with spinal cord injury, spina bifida, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy. There are folks with diabetes and Parkinson's and stroke that will also use intermittent catheters.
Mhm.
And, outside of like just using intermittent catheters, I think like attitudinally, it's the folks who are willing to try out new technologies to see if it fits their needs, especially people who are motivated by reducing infection rates or reducing environmental waste, that I think will be our core users at the outset.
Sure.
And so, that new technology adoption piece of it is definitely a key component. With respect to doctors and things like that, they're going to be, we view them more as partners along the way, where most doctors aren't necessarily getting super hands-on in terms of what catheters people are choosing. That's actually usually the nurse or the occupational therapist within the practice that is assisting with that. But the entire clinical team is going to be important in terms of like helping people become aware of the fact that the Aurie system exists and that it's a viable option in hospitals themselves. So, I think that hospitals have been seeing more guidelines around when do you use an indwelling catheter versus an intermittent catheter.
Mhm.
And so there is increasing pressure of like, do you catheterize at all? Or do you let someone void naturally because urinary tract infections are such an issue? Ultimately, as with many things in the US healthcare system, what it comes down to is how much time does it take and how much does it cost? And so right now, there's still a pretty big challenge because indwelling catheters is kind of like for the from the perspective of the hospital, is like set it and forget it, right? Nurses don't have to change out catheters and things like that nearly as frequently as if they were doing intermittent catheterization. So there are definitely pretty big barriers to that kind of use of intermittent catheters in the hospital setting. But there's also more scrutiny in terms of like when catheters are placed. So I think that time will tell.
Yeah, it's not surprising, and change is slow in large institutions and systems. So I'm curious to see where it eventually goes. And speaking of eventually, what do you hope to achieve in the next year and the next 5 with Aurie?
So in the next year, we're laser focused on submitting to the FDA. We're planning to do that in the first quarter of next year. And then we think our review process is going to take anywhere between 5 and 6 months. And so we're looking at probably around this time next year that we would actually be in market. Our goal is to initially start with the VA. The VA has a dedicated network of spinal cord injury rehabilitation hospitals that specialize in spinal cord injury care for veterans. And from there, we're hoping to expand out into the broader market through Medicare coverage, which is probably going to take another 5 months after we get FDA approval to achieve. Within the next 5, I think and maybe you got some of this from Thane as well, but like, the thing about hardware is you can always figure out ways to improve it. And so even as we're finalizing decisions for how we're going to market next year, we have a backlog of ideas just to make the core system that I shared more portable, just easier to use, all of the above. We're also going to learn a ton from people actually using it in everyday context and giving us feedback. And so continuing to build the product roadmap is really important to us. We also recognize that right now, someone with limited dexterity isn't necessarily going to have the best time using our system because there is a lot of fine motor control involved in loading the catheter. And so part of what we want to do in the next 5 years is partner with hospitals that have a lot of people living with quadriplegia as part of their patient population, so that we can directly work with those individuals to build interfaces and accessories that would make our product more usable. And we have a whole list of, like, extension tubes and urine drainage bags and different tip geometries and different catheter lengths that we want to get into, just because I think this is especially a space where you can't have a one size fits all product. Like, you need to have
Right.
different affordances for different groups of users. So that is important. And then I think, depending on how quickly we work, it would be great to also start looking at other types of products altogether. Our mission at Aurie is to partner with people living with disabilities to design products and services that improve their quality of life and overall health. And the way that I like to put it is, there are tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, that go into funding kind of foundational research, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we cure spinal cord injury? How do we cure MS and eradicate it? And those are really important goals. But I think what ends up happening, if the cure is the only thing that you focus on, is you end up leaving people behind. Like my sister-in-law, who's been living with spinal cord injury for the last 9 years, who's not a good candidate for a cure because she has a complete spinal cord injury. And so, our mission at Aurie is to start to build products and services that can help people in the short term, right? In the next 5 to 10 years, and help improve quality of life, rather than putting all of our chips on, let's find a cure.
Right. It's the people. I mean, you're speaking my language, because it's about the people who are here. Like, when I specifically talk about CP, there are 18 million people with CP in the world, and 1 million of us live in the US, and we're here. And regardless of what research is happening to maybe lessen the severity of CP so that it gives folks an easier place to start from in their lives, because CP does change throughout your life, we're still here, and we need the help, and we need the technology, and we need the education and all of the resources to live our lives as disabled people in this country, where, as I said earlier, it's not really built for us. So I really deeply appreciate that your focus is on, I'm not surprised, just based on our entire conversation and your close relationship with your sister-in-law, that you're focused on making, her life easier because you love her and you know her, but by extension, everyone's lives easier who are either already dealing with a spinal cord injury or may experience a spinal cord injury. And, whatever organizations are doing to alleviate or potentially cure it, that shouldn't ever stop us from trying to help people in the position they are now. And people may or may not want a cure, also depending on their own personal experience and perspectives. And it's great to have people like you who recognizes this need that really needs to be met. So I'm excited by your 5-year plan, and I'm really curious to see all of the other things. You mentioned some of them, but I'm curious to see the different paths that you go down. Like I said, I will absolutely be following you. So where can I and other people go to find out more about your product, how to access it, and what your company is up to?
So our website is livewithaurie.com. That's livewithaurie.com. We recently kind of relaunched the website, and we're still in the process of truly building it out, but we do plan to post blog posts and issue company news and updates as we're getting closer and closer to actually being in market. So I would say that is absolutely the best place to drop by. There is an email sign up, so if you're interested in getting updates, definitely fill that out, and we'll be sending you emails every once in a while.
That's fantastic. We did have one question that came in, and I wanted to make sure I asked it before we close out. So someone asked, for people with incontinence issues, do you know of any research being conducted to predict with high confidence when it's time for someone to make a trip to the bathroom? Because you mentioned, and we sort of know, sensations change and you have to figure out in different ways when you need to go. So do you know of any research in that area?
So I do know of research being done with ultrasound, like wearable ultrasound monitors to help like monitor levels of urine within the bladder. The last I heard, that was like still very much in the like building the technology and kind of validating that it works.
Okay.
There have been companies that have said that they're working on this in terms of like short-term implantables, so like the types of devices that are similar to indwelling catheters because they stay in the bladder. But the last company that I saw that had said that they were working on monitoring urine levels in the bladder with like a indwelling type of product, they actually ended up changing their approach, and they aren't doing it anymore. So I think there are challenges that come with different body types and different people like just trying to figure out like, okay, what constitutes a full bladder? Because I think the other thing that further complicates all this stuff is like the bladder actually does change in response to catheterization. So like some people with indwelling catheters, their bladders can decompensate, and so they end up shrinking so that they can't really hold any urine anymore. Like
wow.
People who have this happen, they'll like describe their bladder as being like the size of a walnut or something like that, because it's effectively like shrank around the indwelling catheter. And I suspect that that's one of the reasons why, like, there's such a big variety in terms of like bladder sizes and when it's full versus not full, that it's a pretty tricky
and then I'm guessing it's also affected by someone's pelvic floor muscles. I have a close friend who's a pelvic floor therapist, and she's always talking about how you should not preventatively go to the bathroom because then you're training your bladder to think it can hold less. So when you said that, it immediately made me think of it, because the indwelling catheter is basically telling your bladder, you can't hold anything and I'm just going to take everything out. I don't know if that's scientifically accurate, but that's what it reminded me of when you were talking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like all of this stuff is also like relatively understudied because it's the same issues with funding in the disability space. Like I think there are a select group of physicians who, I hate to say it this way, who even care, right? Because it affects like a small specific group of people. And so, yeah, even like the studies or our understanding of the physiology, like all of that is imperfect because there aren't a ton of people who are studying it.
It's the opposite, or like a companion side to the niche conversation we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and then underlying everything is just like, well, the cure is like 5 years away, so like why bother, right?
Right, because someone still has to live for 5 years, and they may not want to hear, and they may have gotten used to their life in this way, but they, however they want to live their life. Thank you for that answer. Is there anything else that you want people to know that we haven't covered yet?
I think this is a pretty wide-ranging interview, so nothing comes to mind.
I think so too, but I wanted to give you a chance to add anything if you wanted to. So I just want to thank you, Souvik, and thanks to everyone for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, you can head to steptember.us to learn more about an exciting way to make an impact on companies like Aurie and the other folks in our remarkable US Accelerator. And make sure to keep an eye on your inbox for more about upcoming programs, tech talks, webinars, and Changing What's Possible podcast episodes, where you can learn even more about how we're bringing tech to life and making the world more accessible. Enjoy the rest of your night. Take care.
Thanks.